Hi there, and welcome to Be a Global Citizen, the podcast that explores the concept of global citizenship through the lens of value-creating education. My name is Scott Bauer, and I'm a Soka researcher and educator. I hope you find the discussions, stories, and insights on this podcast to be valuable and inspiring as we strive to become global citizens who are committed to living a contributive life. Enjoy the conversation.
Hi, I'm Kedaar, born and raised in Oman, and now a student at the Harvard Graduate School of Education doing a master's in learning design, innovation technology. My career spanned tech, nonprofits, and now, building an edtech initiative. And I'm really excited to talk about my background as a global citizen, as a third culture kid growing up as well. I'm excited to be here.
Well, I'm excited to have you, Kedaar. Thank you so much. I really appreciate you taking this time to share more about your journey as a global citizen. And I think it's fascinating, right? Your interest in ed tech. This is just only going to get bigger and bigger. And to apply that to the education landscape, I think it's sorely needed. We need more innovation to really change things up, to make more progress. And speaking of innovation, we did a trek over to China that was all about innovation, kind of broadening our perspectives, interacting with different entrepreneurs in the tech space, ed tech space as well. And that'll be something that we can also kind of draw from because, even though we've only known each other for a relatively short period of time, since December,
a couple months.
Yeah, just a couple months. It's great to meet with like-minded individuals and definitely seeking to expand upon our impact. And so, to understand where you're at right now and kind of how you're launching yourself into the next chapter of your career, right? After what is after Harvard, it'd be great to kind of be a little bit more introspective and think what were some of the milestones that got you to where you are now. So I'd love to hear just kind of what are some of the things that come to mind in terms of important events or people, experiences that got you to a place like Harvard.
No, thank you, Scott. It's I love telling stories, right? And I think life should be a collection of stories, and it all starts with my parents emigrating from India to the Middle East, and that's where me and my sister were raised. That's where I was born. So Oman specifically has been home. I was there at the same international IB school for 15 years, K to 12. And growing up in such an interdisciplinary, such an international environment, having the opportunity to not only interact in an international group of peers and teachers within my school, but also be, located in the Middle East, being able to travel to Africa, Europe, Asia, and really, sort of get my foot out there and really explore. I mentioned the idea of being a third culture kid, and that was something that was really driven home when I was in Oman. The idea of having your parents' culture, your host culture. So my parents' culture being India, my host culture being Oman, and then the culture that you're sort of really imbibed in and really bringing into you, which was that sort of international culture from the school, from the people you interact with, from your experiences. And I think all of those experiences and, my quest for always going and searching for what is uncomfortable. How can I challenge myself? How can I just get out there more and more? I ended up going to California after my undergrad because I was like, where's the place that's furthest away from home? My sister spent a lot of her time in Boston, and I would visit and be like, nah, too cold. Let me go a bit further, and made my way to the West Coast, went to UCLA, where I did a degree in computer science and digital humanities, which is about human storytelling. And the reason I did that was because I am always consider myself to be quite interdisciplinary, someone that enjoys being analytical and being a technical problem solver, but also having a more creative human-oriented side. And I think that comes with the experiences that I grew up with my family values, with my school values and home values. And then for me, after having a wonderful time in LA, it was like, okay, where's the next challenge? Okay, first job out of college, Austin, moved to Texas, lived out there, worked for a startup, and then, moved back to LA because I really had this interest in opening and expanding barriers to STEM, to tech, to helping build community, build mentorship. Something I did at UCLA when I was an undergrad. I worked for undergrad admissions, and I would go to local high schools in the LA County area and work with high school students, helping to improve access and equity in higher ed as well. So, when I came back to LA and started working for this nonprofit focused on STEM and tech access, I sort of discovered that my passion lied in this intersection of tech as well as breaking barriers and improving access. And that sort of is what led me to Harvard, to Hugsy, to this program, LDIT, Learning, Design, Innovation, and Tech, where I can combine this technical background with this more mission-oriented access gap and equity provider that I've sort of, been more and more exposed to because of, the things I've done, the places I've been, the people I've seen and interacted with. And I've been very fortunate to grow up in such a multidisciplinary, like a melting pot of cultures, and experience all of that. But not everyone has that chance. So it's like, how can you keep pushing forward and open up opportunities for others?
Wow. Thank you so much, Kedaar. As you were speaking and like sharing your story, I was just kind of identifying all these different like similarities that we have. And I just wanted to like call a few of them out because, it's very clear that you like to travel, right? And as a result of traveling, you're able to then see different cultures, meet with different peoples. And that also kind of comes with getting out of your comfort zone. So I really resonate with that. And then you mentioned about California and wanting to go as far away from your home to really immerse yourself in the next exciting adventure. And it was very similar for me growing up in California when I was choosing my study abroad experience. Out of all the different places that I could go, I was like, I want to go to Peru, right? Because out of the different options, it was further away than like maybe going to Mexico. And I was like, just get me as far away from California as possible. And then also like the admissions piece. That's something that I've also had experience in. And I think it's great when you're actually kind of like boots on the ground, going out into these different schools, different communities and speaking with them about what their needs are. And also just kind of, it's like a vibe check. Like how are high school students doing these days? What are their aspirations? What are their difficulties and challenges? So being able to hear that firsthand, I think really will inform the way you approach this intersection of tech and access, right? Expanding that access. So, you started off your story talking about your immigrant parents. Could you share a little bit more about that? Why did they decide to go to Oman? What was the kind of impetus for that move?
Yeah. So my parents come from very humble backgrounds. We're talking like lower class to lower middle class. My dad grew up with 6 siblings on a farm, southern India. My mom grew up in a very, in Mumbai as well, with 2 siblings in a very tiny apartment with 2 full-time working parents, and having to, take care of our younger brothers. So my parents were, being the oldest siblings in their family, were also caregivers and providers, and in some of these harsher conditions. And what was great was that for them, some of the values that they provided on to me and my sister were stuff that they really excelled at, which was how can they keep pushing the envelope forward, and keep expanding, not only to improve the outcomes for themselves, but also like their families. So as they, their ticket to that was education. Education was a big part of how they were raised and how they sought to seek opportunity. And with that education, being able to pursue, my dad did more, technical, finance, political science, those kind of fields. My mom was more in was in law, econ, and commerce and those kind of fields as well. So they were very interdisciplinary within themselves as well. And finally, the opportunity came, and my dad was offered, the opportunity to move to the Middle East, for a finance job at a very, very like small bank in this country called Oman that no one had really heard of. Very, very burgeoning up now in the Middle East. And the safe thing to have done would be stay in India, be with the family, ride it out, continue, maybe getting further education. Let's see how that goes. But my parents were also very much, risk takers, new experiences, maybe provide a new life for their family, future family, me and my sister. So they moved to Oman, and it's the best decision they could make because they came at a time where Oman was very expat friendly, very much, this was a time where it was growing as a country. It was still very like underdeveloped back then, and now it's still developing. But being raised in a place like that and being, born there where it's so full of culture, so full of values, you kind of contrast it with a place like, people think Middle East, they think Dubai, they think Qatar, they think, Saudi Arabia, which are like these, extremely more modern, skyscrapers, all of this. Oman is very, very low key, full of nature, wide open roads, smaller buildings. And I like to joke, the population of Oman is like 4 million, which is the population of LA, right? But the entire country itself is about 3/4 the size of California. So it's very spread out. And I think because they were able to make that move, take that risk, that honestly paid off because it ended up resulting in a better future for me and my sister. I think that's sort of what made me want to always look forward to see, how am I growing? How am I learning? How can I, take the sacrifices and the risks and the values that my parents made and have given me and really carry that forward, and really make the most of it, which is why I'm always pushing to learn, to grow, to challenge myself, to put myself in those ambiguous situations, because that's where you grow. You grow when things are, not tough, when you're not complacent, when you're able to really, I guess go through it. And that's how you can experience, I think that true open-minded, growth mindset.
Wow, that's amazing. It is like a really risky move when you think about, oh, this is like a country that maybe they'd never been to before, right? Different part of the world, and yet, I think it also requires a lot of courage and kind of like foresight of your parents to be like, well, this could be the move. This could actually be us articulating our own values of like getting out of our comfort zone that could then be passed on to their children, and very clearly, right, as you articulate it, that value was instilled within you. And and I think, speaking about your family, like your parents' upbringings, when you said that your father had 6 siblings on a farm, again, resonates with my mom, actually, her experience growing up with many siblings on a farm in South Korea. Yes. And then the fact that, education was really seen as, kind of the major value, right? Of like, what can you possibly use and like leverage to improve your circumstances, to understand what else is out there. And and I think that their decision to come to Oman and like what they've been able to create in terms of their family situation, and then like raising you and your sister, it's quite unique, very much like their own story, but it comes from like being decisive at critical moments. Maybe they had an inkling as far as, Oman as a kind of, as you said, burgeoning, like it's going to get bigger and, more developed, but maybe not, right? So, you're growing up in Oman, right, with your sister. They decide to put you in this IB school. maybe could you speak a little bit about the culture of IB? I'm sure that, you weren't the only kid, third culture kid, as you put it. So yeah, what was it like, just kind of broadly speaking, in terms of, how you developed a more international, global mindset through that particular environment?
Yeah, yeah. It's and again, I'm very, very grateful for it, because my sister and I were put, when we entered this IB school, and I was even luckier because I got attended from like kindergarten. My sister attended from middle school onwards. But being in kindergarten at a school where we had 60 plus nationalities, and in Oman, and it was at that time, it was the only IB school there. So if you were an expat coming in, or you're an international, person coming in for work, like there was really one place you could send your kid. And my school was very small. The entire K to 12 was 1,000 students. My graduating class was like 50 kids. So the fact that there was still so much diversity given such a small amount of people was a big factor in why it made me more appreciative of travel, of exposing myself to new cultures, of interacting with people on the same problem, but coming in with such different viewpoints and different, home cultures and host cultures, to this shared common international culture that the IB was able to provide. I think as a system and as a curriculum, IB did a great job of just fostering sort of the things I like, of like interdisciplinary, creative thinking, critical thinking, that really prepared me well moving into college and coming to higher ed as well, where it's so focused on not just doing the work, but why are we doing this work? How can we do it better? How can we really evaluate, synthesize, and take all these components, and really think about what we're doing? And across, you would think, the fact that we're writing essays in math, that's not a common thing. You think math, you're thinking problems, or science, or physics, or whatever it is. So I like that it had multiple means of ways to express yourself, of assessment, of really these ways that we're able to calibrate and at least, cater to different learning needs and, a diverse group of needers. I guess in the best way that it could. Obviously, there's no perfect system, but for me, it was a great way to really come and be in, that international minded person coming to an American higher ed institution.
Mm. Yeah, that's awesome. You said 60 different nationalities, just in kindergarten. But like, what about for like, local, like, residents from Oman? Like, how many were also there? Because
it was also like, there was like, they were there, like, I would say like 10% of every class had this local Omanis as well, because for them it was a great way to explore and get into new cultures as well, and get out of some of the local schools, and for us as well to get more into the local culture. So I think it was just a good learning experience from everyone, sort of multi-connected. Everyone is teaching everyone, everyone's learning from everyone.
Yeah, and then sharing, right? That the spirit of like, this is kind of where I'm coming from. This is important in my culture and for my own identity. And I'm sure that there were many different events that were hosted at school that really, spotlighted different traditions. When it comes to the culture in Oman, though, like what was, maybe could you speak to maybe one tradition in Oman that maybe a lot of people don't really know about or hear about, but that you really appreciated, that, you valued in some way? Like, is it like a particular day, or is there like an event that happens regularly that is very important for is it Omanese culture? Omanese culture, yeah.
So the Omani culture, so Oman is a Muslim country, and obviously Islam plays a huge role in that country. But again, given the fact that there are so many expats, like you mentioned, like all these other traditions were celebrated. for the other Asian traditions and the more Western traditions. But I think the core, was like our Independence Days, where like November 18th, or like having a musket is the capital one, or having a musket festival that's celebrating, the sort of the new year, and bringing in all these different cultures and performances and people as well. And then even during like Ramadan, a very, a Muslim oriented holiday, being invited, even if you're not Muslim, being invited to like the iftars or the dinners after to break the fast. And very, very communal, very, a lot of community gatherings with different sorts of people. So I think the big common factor tying together all of these traditions, and I guess Oman as a culture, is the idea of community and accepting everyone.
That's beautiful. I really like, you've experienced this, and you were invited to these different events, and that, it played an important role in your own upbringing and your own understanding of what community is. I think also just like mutual respect, right? That like there's no one tradition that, kind of supersedes or is better than others. And having that kind of appreciation, I think, goes a long way in terms of establishing trust, right, with those who come from that culture. And it's a lot, though, to take in with this third culture kid idea, because you're kind of, I don't know if the word would be juggling, or is it like integrating, internalizing, or reckoning with, three very distinct cultures that are just kind of like, I'm just imagining like a washing machine of like parents' culture, host culture, international school culture. And it's just like, are they actually like, is it meant to be fused together in your own, identity? Or is it still meant to retain its own specific qualities, like laundry in a washing machine? Yeah. Like, how would you kind of explain that? How do you unpack that?
So it's so interesting, right? Because it's such a unique fusion of cultures, where I have this. So you know how people they code switch with languages, for example, right? I have this ability when I'm speaking to, the way I speak to Middle Eastern people versus the way I speak to Indian people versus the way I speak to American people is also very different, because it's based on those specific cultures. And that's how I can, I sort of culturally switch that kind of context. And that's my cultural code switching sort of mechanism. I think what is unique is definitely the intersection of those different cultures, but also like remembering at the core what makes each of those things important, right? Whether it's my parents, whether it's Oman, whether it's, everything sort of in between. But it's why, where even coming to, when I came to college, I don't understand the lives of Indian kids who grew up in India, because I never lived in India, right? I don't understand the lives of Middle Eastern kids that grew up outside the Middle East, because I don't also have that kind of culture there. So it's very interesting finding the pockets in which there are similarities and differences, and really honing in on what makes us, not only what makes us similar, but what makes us different, and why is that important, and how can we sort of capitalize on those differences as well, because differences for me equal more things to learn.
Yeah. So what you're saying, if I'm understanding correctly, it's like, this diversity abounds, right? Because of the cultural context, so many other probably is like contexts as well, like socioeconomic, political, and, there's this understanding that even though your parents are from India, right? You weren't raised in India. And so there's like this, you have to know where the boundaries are in terms of your experience, and then the kind of like uncharted, like unknown experience of like, waiting to then hear what they have to say about it. So there's a certain sensitivity, I think, to that, and tolerance, right? Because definitely, you don't want to be that guy that just seemingly knows everything. Yeah, everything. And then you kind of come across as ingenuine, or kind of just a little arrogant, maybe. So that process of like negotiating what your experiences are in in comparison to others, and the openness of just wanting to like create that pathway, I think is a real skill and something that more and more needs to be taught and like actively practiced. Because yeah, I mean, like like when you move to California, people from all over the place go there to study, to start their careers, to maybe start a family and like live there. But like sometimes the siloing effect happens, and that is very real. So that kind of brings us to your move to California. Just a quick question. What was I don't know, like a culture shock that you experienced there? I mean, I know you've traveled a lot, and you probably have like met maybe Californians or other people from the US in your travels or at your international school, but it's different when you're fully immersed and committed to like a 4-year undergraduate experience. So yeah, what's something that kind of caught you off guard that you'd like to mention to the Californian?
So, I mean, like you mentioned, because of being more well traveled, and as well as my journey to California was very interesting because I'd spent like a good time in America because my sister went there. So the same way that my parents were a role model for education, my sister was like the role model of like, wow, now she's the American higher ed. And she was all, fully based in Boston and did law school in Boston after as well. So for me, like, how can I go there and and also expand on that effort? I'd spent so much time on the East Coast whenever I'd visit her, or, I went to summer school in Boston as well. So California was the place where I was like, this would be, and it's somewhere I visited before I went to UCLA. My first time that I remember visiting it was getting there, and I was like, wow, this is really similar to home. In terms of the weather, in terms of the beaches, in terms of those sort of, those natural landmarks. But what was different, and I think what was more of a shock was, I think the fact that and this is no offense to you, but California is being so California centric, right? Where in Oman, everyone is, so, always out, going somewhere else, has ideas about what's happening. But California, a lot of people I met had never even left the state, right? And honestly, like, it's such a great place, right? Like there's so much there. It has everything. It's so big. So I think being able to like just tell people like, hey, I'm from Oman, and them not knowing what that is or where that is, and then understanding, sort of figuring out, okay, how can I now tell my story, and how can I help them understand my perspective while also understanding the context and the culture that they grew up in. Because again, it's a good reminder that, just because you're all coming to the same place like UCLA, doesn't mean you have at all any of the the same shared experiences.
Yeah, no offense taken, by the way. I do believe that a lot of Californians tend to just, stay in a comfort zone kind of mentality, and only rarely push up against that, but only for maybe specific reasons that often are for like career advancement, let's say. But when you find yourself, meeting with someone, maybe it was at UCLA, and them asking you, oh, where are you from? And you say, Oman. It's such a teachable moment to really get them out of their comfort zone, right? Because, if you were to like put a map in front of them and say, point to Oman, they probably would not know. And it's kind of like, it shows a gap, right, in knowledge, but it also shows an opportunity, right, in terms of what kind of place is Oman like. I've never been to Oman myself, but the fact that you started off with a very positive sense, saying, oh, actually, California reminded you a lot of the natural beauty of Oman, makes me suddenly want to go to Oman and be like, hey, I want to go hit up the beach and go on like a road trip somewhere there. Wouldn't that be fun? It is very far, but we live in times where travel is probably as affordable as it could be, compared to like years decades ago. And and so again, it's just like kind of pushing the envelope, like you were saying, by just simply being, like true to your story, just being like, yeah, I live in Oman. Like don't revel in it, but just be like, hey, it is a great place, right? Some people might, lean too far into it. But yeah, I think that's really great. And I thought partially, I thought you were going to talk about like, Californians like obsessions with like In-N-Out or something and being like, they're so weird.
I mean, I get the hype though. So
yeah, the smaller things, but we don't have to get into that. It's okay, but yeah, so, this one other thing that I wanted to ask about, was, your major at UCLA, you said computer science, right?
Mm-hmm.
Everyone has heard of computer science, I think, right? Everyone has a computer. And then you also mentioned digital humanity, and you said that that's kind of like storytelling.
Yeah.
Could you speak a little bit more about what digital humanity entails? And beyond just the storytelling, like how do you see that applied in the world around you?
So this goes back to what I said about being interdisciplinary. My favorite subject at school always, and even when I did IB, was English. And when I came into UCLA, my goal was to double major, and I was looking, okay, computer science, English, let's do it. Very hard to do, not feasible. And then I was sort of shopping for minors, and I jumped around from like cognitive science, and then like ancient East studies, and like Greek studies, and like, I was like, I just like learning about, being more on the humanities side of things. And then I finally found digital humanities, and it sort of really resonated with me and my interests and my goals, because it's all about storytelling, but more specifically, it's about human-centric data storytelling. And the way it sort of functioned was, it was a bridge between what we termed at UCLA North Campus, which is our more art, social sciences, humanities-oriented majors, and our South Campus, which was all the STEM majors. And it was a great bridger because it brought in people who wanted to be more technical. It brought in people who wanted to be more creative. And it was very team, project, real-world deliverable oriented. So every class, you're working with a group of diverse people to learn new skills, whether technical or non-technical, to build really thorough research and data-oriented projects. And so for me, it actually is a big factor of what led me to my career later on, which was all around product management, which again is a interdisciplinary sort of field in tech between design, tech, and business. So I think that was sort of the common theme, was how can I leverage both sides of my brain? And I think those, things like that is what enabled me to.
Wow, that's awesome. Again, like digital humanity, probably one of the first times I've ever heard of that. But I love this idea of it being a bridge between the humanities and STEM, being able to hold both the creative side of your brain and the technical side, because, you need both. Oftentimes, you have teams, right, working together that maybe are like stronger in one, than the other, but to have that skill set, and then, kind of lead in a capacity as like a project manager to then, very clearly lay out what your vision is so important. And I just think that the interdisciplinary side of it, very true to the IB experience. And and then just also recognizing the complexities of real world application, and like how do we actually get an idea to actual like concrete implementation. I think that's what great training you had from undergrad, and like, what great fortune you had to come across that particular minor. It was a minor that turned out to have major implications on your career.
Exactly.
There we go. So you also said that at UCLA you did admissions. That's awesome. I think admissions are so important because it really brings into question the access and equity side of the conversation that all universities are having, but some have greater pressures to really, like how can they actually expand upon that? And UCLA being the most competitive school, definitely in California, if not across the nation, probably reckons with just how many applications they receive. It is a, massive, system that they have to like kind of work with to then get to their decisions. But maybe could you speak a little bit about like what was like a major takeaway from your time in admissions, and how are you applying that to kind of these future endeavors that you have?
Yeah. That was one of the highlights of me. So I was both a Bruin ambassador and a tour guide. So I was it's so and what you said, right? UCLA is the most applied to college in the nation. Last year over 118,000 applications. So a school that was, it's still a public school, that shouldn't be super, super competitive, is just becoming more competitive because more and more people are applying to it. And for us, it's how do we make sure that we can open up, that sort of ability and that awareness to some of these communities that might not be aware or might doubt themselves. So a lot of the tours, so my tours were actually focused on kids in elementary and middle school. So really exposing them early to what college could be like, what are some key takeaways, and for me personally, that was a great exercise in how can I translate concepts and visions and these goals to such a, to different grade levels, to different groups of people, and still get them excited and, hopefully they start, they're like, oh, wow, like this could be a place I could end up in. Let me start working hard in middle school, boom, 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 and make my way to high school. A lot of the work I did in the actual high schools, I was actually assigned a lot of schools in the Pomona region. So I would drive out there and work directly with students, mostly low income, Black and Latinx oriented students, who for a long time would, just doubt like, hey, I can't get into college because I don't have this, this, and this. Like, what's the point in going? My parents didn't go to college and they're fine. And it's sort of like kind of getting on their level and being able to highlight just the opportunities that it can provide and what it can do, and being very real, like how do you pay for college? How, what's sort of out there? How, what are the steps involved? What does context look like? What is this idea of a holistic application? In order to, really get into some of these fears and misconceptions that might be arising. And at least that is a step to improving that sort of access and sort of equity when we're applying to these colleges. Because for example, I was very lucky because my sister went to higher ed in America. So my parents already had a good idea of how the process worked. So when it came to me, it was like, there wasn't a lot for us to figure out. But for a lot of these kids who didn't even have parents or siblings or anyone that have gone to higher ed, it's brand new, right? And a big thing is that, the other big problem is that the national ratio is like 1 counselor to 400 students. So college counselors are now overburdened, and those all the resources that aren't able to be shared. So I think the big takeaway that I've sort of been carrying, it really helped first boost my passion for access and equity to that higher ed space. But it's more so, how can we open up some of these doors and at least increase exposure and increase awareness, and improve resource, dispersion at least, to these groups, to underrepresented groups, to underserved groups, that need it. And that's how we sort of engage. Like, how can we build an open-minded mindset? How can we build that interdisciplinary culture if we're not taking in all of these, these other viewpoints?
Yeah, no, thank you for sharing. It's very easy, like when you're in that kind of role, to see this massive mountain that is kind of before these students, right? Whether they're in elementary school or in high school, like looking at the application process and thinking, oh, that's not going to happen. And like, why would I subject myself to that?
Yeah.
It does go to your point about like how to get more people to see the value in stepping out of their comfort zone. But like, any good teacher, right, understanding that good scaffolding is the way to go, because you're not going to be able to, just kind of snap your fingers and then have them suddenly understand all the intricacies of applying to higher ed in the United States. Yeah. It's just not going to happen. And clearly, right, from like, looking at the national like statistics you mentioned about, like, one college counselor has like 400 students. Yeah. To keep track of, of course there's going to be a dip in the quality of it. But, even knowing all of that, like knowing what you know and having experienced that role and being in your capacity, still seeking change by having, like some progression, like, I know, what if we try this? What if we add this, like in your own way, I think is the right mentality, right? Because it's very, you can just look at it and just throw your hands up and be like, you know what? I'm just not gonna do that. Like, it's kind of hopeless, right?
I think that's where it comes. I think what I like to focus on is like, you can find that zone of impact. So it's like where your skills and passion and, I guess, outside needs sort of intersect, right? So for me, I'm coming in from, I have this international background, I have this edtech background. These are my skills. I have this passion for access, and then there's this need. What can I do given I can't solve every problem, but what can I do and what can I focus on that really motivates me so that I can really go and build deeper, sustainable contributions to populations like this?
Yes. And so these kind of like populations maybe that have not been in a privileged, kind of position where their families know about this process or have the kind of financial means to, set them up to learn about it. I know that your interest in, tech and STEM and building access, this is now being applied in a lot of your studies, and then the kind of work that you're doing at Harvard, and it's very exciting. I know you recently shared about this recent like edtech venture that you're, getting more like headway and you're really like running with it. Would you like to share a little bit about what it is that you're kind of building?
Yeah, would love to share. So, it's great to be at a place like Harvard where, you have all these goals and ambitions coming in, but now you can have the resources and tools to actually tackle some of those things and meet the like-minded people here, such as yourself that, they're all passionate about this space, this education space. And for me, with the idea of STEM access being so important, it comes down to foundations of the issues of math illiteracy here, especially in the United States, especially for English learner, immigrant, newcomer populations, multilinguals that are affected not because they're necessarily bad at math, but because the English and the language is a barrier to them understanding math content, math questions. So now at Harvard, I'm working on research and working on a social impact venture focused on how can we break down some of those linguistic barriers and how can we improve access to math for K-8 English language learners. And, how can we, do research, go into classrooms, really figure out what, can we fix content at a more, higher level, so that teachers who have, 25 kids in their class from 25 different nationalities, for example, can now, help them actually learn the math rather than answer questions about what does the English mean, when that shouldn't be a barrier in that aspect. So that's a space I'm really passionate about now. And I hope to, continue building that mission of access and equity in, within STEM.
Yeah, no, I think it's so great that you have like such specific kind of like, this multilingual populations and like really trying to tackle math literacy is great. I just think, broadly speaking, math illiteracy is just happening to everyone in the US. And there's definitely the kind of like anxiety, right? I don't know if it's called math anxiety, but I think most people, including myself, get that from maybe the way that we were taught math, and how, detached it can be from, our day-to-day living. And so definitely, there's another bridge to be built in terms of like understanding why it is important. And yeah, and then just kind of having it be less of a barrier, right, in terms of like how they can really be like, tap into their full potential, and yeah, see the opportunities that arise from that. So that's great. And I think that, it's just the very start, but definitely there's like this through line in kind of what you've been passionately pursuing in your education and in your early career of really trying to contribute to the kind of like access question of like, how can we really get more people to benefit from like better curriculum, to be able to broaden their perspectives and to have better outcomes for not just like career, but just for their life, right?
Yeah.
And that is building a larger community as well. I think that, education is always dealing with like the broadest strokes of like our population, but also the longest kind of timeline, because it takes so long to actually implement a lot of these initiatives. But yes, don't give up. Continue to persevere in that and leverage Harvard for all it's worth so that you can make it a reality.
That's what we're here for. That's what we're here for.
Exactly. So, another question that I wanted to ask, and maybe this one's more like specific to the global citizen piece. I feel like, you just so effortlessly spoke of many values that would tie into global citizenship when you talked about your parents, when you talked and their values, talked about IB school, talked about you going to different, like going to California. But yeah, what would you say is like maybe one of the most important qualities of a global citizen? Is there anything that like really just stands out? And if you just can't just say one, you can also do two. But
okay, I was gonna say hard to distill into one, but I think the first one that comes is the idea of having that open-minded curiosity learning mindset, right? And that means, are you willing to adapt? Are you able to challenge your own assumptions, and come and experience, different disciplines, cultures, lived experiences, be interdisciplinary, be, between different people, experiences. And I think that leads to the second one, which is the idea of actually building genuine relationships, authentic connections with people from different backgrounds, having the sense, finding what your shared purpose might be, but figuring out, which of these perspectives are valuable, and also being able to engage with these diverse communities, right? Because no one knows everything. So whether it's through travel, like we did to our trek in China, or it's through mentorship or working on community stuff, or doing education, at a place like, at a higher institution where you're put into these places. I think as long as, people are engaging with these diverse communities and they have this learning mindset, that's a good step to becoming a global citizen.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with you. And I think that, being open-minded and building genuine relationships definitely tie in to each other, because, people really, feel that when you're like considering their opinions, right? You're really hearing them out. That trust is being built, and trust is vital for relationships. And yeah, not going into a conversation thinking you already know its outcome or best, but just having that learning mindset, right? That desire to kind of, as you've said many times, like push the envelope and kind of go forth and just have this burning fire, like flame, right? Of knowledge, and just being like, what else is out there? So yeah, I think those are great qualities, essential qualities, and very much ones that we see through your story. So thank you so much, Kedaar. And the last question that I want to ask, and I ask this to all of my guests, it's a book or like a movie or any kind of recommendation for our listeners. So what would you like to share?
Yeah, I think the first one, I have two. Okay. The first that comes to mind is Dan Carlin's Hardcore History podcast. And the reason why I bring that up, so he's an American historian, commentator that creates we're talking 4 5 hour long episodes. But stay with me. It's done in such a way where, again, he is such a storyteller, and it's improved like my way of like, how do I tell stories? How do I capture, the sort of theater of the mind, as he likes to call it, and be able to like translate something as, that might be dense and as boring as, some war or some important, event that's, in some country, to a very engaging and very accurate portrayal of why it matters now, right? Why does World War I matter now? Why does, the East Peloponnesian Wars, or, any of these big, the kings of the Roman Empire, or anything, like, why do they matter now? So I think it's a good way to just also understand global citizenship, but from more of a past-oriented perspective, bringing it to the future. The second recommendation is a book I recently read. It's called The Defining Decade by Meg Jay, and it's she's a clinical psychologist. I actually have the book right here. But it's geared towards people in their 20s, but I think it's applicable to anyone at any stage of life, because it's about what matters most and how to make progress in life and have that impact. And two of her concepts stand out for me. She talks about the idea of building your identity capital. So sort of things that we've sort of discussed here, which is, how can you build up your personal assets, your experiences that really shape who you are and what you can offer, right? And it's all about taking on new experiences, building new skills, and that results in that long-term success. And the other term, again, leading back to like building genuine relationships, is the idea of weak ties. Creating connection with people that we don't know well, that are outside our comfort zone, that are outside our, our closer circles, and really being able to just go and be like, what is your story, right? And how can I help you? And how can we help each other? So I think there's a lot of good lessons in both of those. Yeah.
Great recommendations. I haven't heard of the Hardcore History podcast. When you said like how to capture the theater of the mind, I was like, ooh, that sounds so fun. And like, I love that. And the relevance of like what's happening now, right? It's only possible because of past events. So being able to like draw that link, and maybe it's not even like this kind of like connecting point of like two different dots, but really the kind of like parallel nature with which we understand one narrative and another, and the themes that are just pervasive, that just kind of continue forth throughout history, that we need to be mindful of so that we don't repeat it. And then the defining decade, you said this is mostly for like 20-year-olds. I'm like, no, I just passed this. I'm 30. I'm old. Oh no, not that old. But yeah, I think that, what you already brought up in terms of like identity capital and like building connections and like, going out of your comfort zone, especially with those connections with people we don't know, I just think is so important. And but it takes a lot of courage, right? To like put yourself out there, to like ask, a question to someone, or to take an opportunity, like going to China, and you're like, I've never been to China, and like, see what happens. And I think, there's so much of like, filling up each page of your like each chapter to the brim of your life book, and being like, wow, I really maxed it out as best I could, because then people take note and they're like, oh my God, I've been to China too. And then you're like, wow, let's talk about our China. Yeah. Right? Imagine that. So, so many different ways to like, have these touch points with individuals, and recognize that we're not all that different. Just knowing your purpose, I think it's a very attractive quality, and because people then want to like help you on that, right? Or they're
everyone has the shared universals, right? To some level, we are similar, and it's sort of, we have these variability on top of that. How can we, now have this conversation about our differences and our experiences to bring us back together to that common goal of, I guess, making the world a better place.
Of course, right. And it is possible. So yeah, thank you so much, Kedaar. This has been a lovely conversation. I really enjoyed learning more about your journey, this incredible story that you're building, that you're filling up, each chapter, and very excited to see what becomes of your ed tech venture with math illiteracy. I think it's very much needed. We'll both be graduating in May, so we're finishing up this chapter, only to start another one. It's going to be great. And thank you so much. I wanted to give the last word to you. So any final thoughts, any kind of send off that you'd like to put out there as we kind of wrap up this conversation?
Yeah, no, thank you, Scott, for doing this. It's such a great initiative, and a great way to connect people and hear the voices of global citizens everywhere. Because again, I'm just one voice with my set of experiences. And there's so many ways to, so many other people out there with different stories, different lessons. So overall, I think it's just, get out there, meet some people, make some connections, get outside your comfort zone, and just be a little spontaneous in life, because you never know what that one conversation will do or that one experience will do, because you'll get a lot of learning.